Telewizja Republika, and we welcome in our studio Matthew Tyrmand, son of one of the most famous contemporary Polish writers and political activists, just arrived from the United States, which is a big deal these days, apparently. Andrzej Duda won the presidential election just in July 12th. That was a significant moment. Did you expect that he would win?
I did, as you know, because we communicate regularly. By the way, thank you for having me. I always love being with you, Alex. You're one of my favorite interrogators in this country. Okay. Yeah, no, I expected it. I made the call. I thought that he would have potentially won outright in the first round, if not for the spoilers that were Confederacja. And there was a close margin there. Obviously, the second round was close. I thought it would be on a knife's edge. I think it settled out at 52-48. I did not expect that Platforma would be able to mobilize enough to get a simple majority no matter what the scenario. Obviously replacing Kidawa-Błońska, who is absolutely atrocious politician. I know her, she's an atrocious woman as well. She tried to block Year of Tyrmand out of spite a few years ago. But putting in Trzaskowski, yeah, there was a little bit more energy in the campaign because he is more telegenic and charismatic. But I think that polls recognize that Andrzej Duda had done a credible job. And the most important issue, and this is what I talked about both leading into the election when I did American press and here, is that the most important issue for the president to maintain is, as head of state, the relations, and especially in this situation right now, transatlantic. You know, the European Union is being well handled out of the government, which makes sense given the way Brussels attacks the government. But Duda's relationship with Trump, what they have secured from energy investment to 3 C's commitment and recognition, and of course NATO strengthening and security, and the troop deployments that are coming and that I've been predicting for the better part of the last year. I was obviously very close to people in the White House, and I was there for several of Duda's visits. The telegraphing of the White House to the polls was always, yes, we have your back. Let us do it on our schedule. Let us do it in ways that make sense with our other geopolitical considerations, including not trying to escalate with Russia, which is why there was the schema, the paradigm of moving troops into Western Poland, around Poznan, more than the direct imperative to put them in Suwałki, in between Kaliningrad and Belarus, which might have risked escalation. It's something the Poles were looking for, was more direct troop engagement in this peripheral border region, which is at more risk of incursion. But the Americans did, I think, a savvy thing. Their technology is good enough that should there be a hot conflagration in the northeast of the country, whether it's through Kaliningrad or Belarus, the capabilities of the American military forces and technology are so strong and proficient that they can get anywhere very quickly. So, the movement of troops from Germany is a wonderful optic. Germany's been a deadbeat miscreant on its NATO commitment of 2% GDP. They've been free riding, and it's the most successful economy in Europe, so that makes it an special abortion. And at the same time, here they are undermining EU cohesion and security of Central Europe with Nord Stream 2 and doing a deal with the devil and Russia for their own economic consideration at the direct cost of the security of Central Europe, while they claim to push for more cohesion, and everyone should be doing exactly what they say out of Berlin and Brussels. Right. So what Trump has done is very, very good here.
Let us talk about that a little bit later, but the internal Polish tensions and relationships. Now there are 3 years to the next election, so we will have the next campaign in 2.5 years.
Yeah, so finally some peace and quiet. Well, you get the EU, you get the parliament, you do well in the regions, and you have the president's office. So, I mean, thank goodness, no electioneering out of Dobra Zmiana or the opposition for a couple of years. I think Poles are fatigued with it, and the consolidation of all of these elections within a 12 to 15-month period is exhausting. So it's actually really nice to see that the mandates were renewed, expanded in some ways, and now we can just have some, spokoj.
What are the things that need to be solved in the first place in the internal? Polish, yep.
I mean, your viewers, maybe
internal politics. I mean, not only the politics, party politics,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
also the economical things,
Yeah, so
hinging on the
agenda.
United States support and so on.
Well,
and so on.
internally, from a political standpoint, the thing that worries me the most, and I think that needs to be cleaned up the most, is the internecine, internal factionalization in turf wars, mostly led by a guy I think is a cretin, Zbigniew Ziobro, who is more interested in his own power accumulation and creating a patronage system, and recruits these young figures that can be his proteges, and they engage in undermining campaigns of the government writ large, with the hope that they would come into some sort of greater control, which I think would be very, very unhealthy for Poland. I think Morawiecki does a very good job, and the people in his camp are far and away, from what I've seen being involved in Poland and a critic of Polish politics for more than 10 years, far and away the most competent people. So you've got quite a few politicians who really are technocratic in a good way, like Morawiecki, like Emilewicz. I believe that Morawiecki keeps people around him that are smart, not just who play the political power game well, which is what Ziobro does. So I see there's a new media law coming that's been telegraphed by all sides of the ruling camp. And my worry is that this is going to be a redux of January 2018 with the EPN Ustawa, where it was an internal destabilizing tactic of Ziobro to come up with the worst, most offensive piece of legislation that would undermine Morawiecki, and that Morawiecki would have to answer for and to in the international stage. That's what happened. This came on the heels of Morawiecki's escalation to prime minister, elevated to prime minister. And he was doing a very good job in the international arena with the Eurocrats, with the Davos crowd, and so there was this internal attack. I wrote about it for the Jerusalem Post. I know Duda Zmiana was not happy that I quote-unquote aired their dirty laundry internationally, especially given it was a dispute with Israel in the Jerusalem Post. As I've had to remind these people, I don't work for them. I'm not their lobbyist. I'm not their, I believe in a free, independent, strong, successful, prosperous, secure Poland, not a free, strong, prosperous, secure Prawo I Sprawiedliwość. If those things dovetail and work together, so be it. I have no problem with that as a conservative, that we have a conservative party in power. I think that's a good thing. It's why I've supported them, especially on issues of European Union independence, what I call the Westphalian sovereign model, that states have a responsibility, first and foremost, to their constituency, not to some sort of amalgam confederation of technocratic elites that are looking to cement power in one top-down mechanism. I believe that power should be devolved to the individual, and certainly when it comes to bilateral relations, the individual state should maintain the power over its internal statehood issues. And so I absolutely approve of Duda Zmiana doing things like reform of courts, which still need decommunization, reform of the Foreign Service, which certainly needs decommunization. So there are things that I certainly agree with, but I am worried about this media law. I think it will be another shot across the bow internally to weaken the greater camp in favor of this marginal faction of power-hungry would-be almost autocrats in the Ziobro camp. So with this media law, it's important to note that we have very good relations with many countries that have equity exposure to media assets, led, of course, by the US, Germany, France, Canada, Brussels, Belgium, Netherlands, so Switzerland, Czech Republic. So, these are countries that, should this media law start to push toward nationalization or some sort of real tough structure on speech codification, like they did with the IPN, then Morawiecki and the new foreign minister, Zbigniew Rau, are going to be hearing from their counterparts in these 6 or 7 very powerful countries and strong allies of Poland. So this kind of internal destabilization, I'm hoping it doesn't come to this. I'm in favor of some sort of media law. It is not healthy that a foreign-owned press with high, close political ties and an agenda could come into another country and try and reset the agenda around the priorities of those foreign media corporatists and owners tied to hostile governments. There has to be some regulation and monitoring in effect. There has to be competition. There's certainly been facets of antitrust in the American sense with foreign ownership of media, with the private sector being foreign owned on some high metric of 80 or 90% in terms of readership and revenues. So I do believe there has to be some sort of restructure and competition injected, some honesty. Look, in the US, we're pushing a fake news law as well because the corporate media is so to the left and so trying to destabilize society, which I know we'll talk about in depth with some of these activist terroristic movements. So the US is grappling with the same thing, and I'm in favor of it. But the form and the detail is where the devil lies, and we need to be very cognizant and make sure that the guy who I call Książę Ciemności does not have free hand to destabilize the country as he tried in 2018, as he's tried multiple times, as he's tried with some of the attempted reformations of the court, where he's tried to relegate Duda to irrelevancy and break down checks and balances and divided enumerated powers. So I think that we have to be very cognizant, and we have to do this right, which means it needs to be done out of those who really care about Poland and Poland's success, which I view as Morawiecki's camp a lot more than Ziobro's camp. Ziobro's camp cares about getting Ziobro and his people power and the trappings of that power.
Which one can hardly blame him, because this is what the politics is about.
No, that's not true. I mean, if you claim to be a patriot and you're trying to help the country, you're trying to advance the country's strategic interests and internal social culture, then you don't do things that are going to undermine the leadership that you're supposed to be reporting to, and you don't do things that are going to undermine the country on a global stage, which he's happy to do because he doesn't have an international competence. It's not his job to put out the fires that he creates. I view him as an arsonist, a political arsonist, and I think that he is a cancer on this country.
Okay, well, that's a very interesting position. Let us move to the other topics.
We'll see if this gets aired.
Well, I wouldn't focus entirely on this very subject.
That's just one of many.
You're right. We live in you mentioned the presence of the United States troops in Poland, which makes us feel very different than in 2014 when we had the Ukraine unrest.
What about 2009? September 1st and 17th, 2009, when missile defense was yanked by Barack Obama.
Exactly. But I remember 2014, and I was really walking the towns of Poland and looking where is possible escape from the bombs or something like that, because it looked that serious.
Now you sound like Michał Rahon, but okay.
Now we had the tensions in Belarus. The Belarus is 200 kilometers, less than 200 kilometers here from Warsaw, so theoretically it's hour and a half drive, and you are in Grodno, hour and 2 hours, if you are in Brześć. And suddenly nobody cares because we have United States soldiers over here. We have very strong cooperation, and that really changes the Polish strategy.
It does, but I believe I'm a rational pragmatist. Some people would disagree with my own self-assessment. My view is that it's somewhat symbolic. Poland is an anchor NATO member that has been paying the requisite 2%, moving toward 3% of statutory GDP. As a commitment to collective defense, Poland is on the front lines as the biggest economy and the biggest country by population within the NATO membership that exists on the peripheral border. I think that NATO is strong, that there's an implicit guarantee that Trump has made it stronger. Now having troops here and telegraphing an upward trend in more troops, and especially coming out of Germany, it's a strong symbol that, yes, it does make you feel a little bit more secure. But my own view is that Putin, as aggressive as he is, Ukraine is an incredible incursion and breach of 21st century normative conventions in geopolitics and respecting your neighbor's borders. We know his revanchist ethos. It was like Kaczynski who kept him out of Georgia when he attempted to destabilize that part of the former Soviet Union. Belarus has been a Soviet and post-Soviet proxy since 89, 90, and it's been not a very strong independent nation. It has made no attempts to become one, so it has existed as it has existed, and there has not been a threat that Belarusians would come over the Polish border as a proxy for Putin's internal incursion into the country. What worries me more than Belarus is the Iskandars in Kaliningrad. That worries me more because Russians are capable of making very, very cynical calculus if they want to escalate. And the fact that they've got a weapon system that could inflict some pain and damage on the Polish state so quickly, so easily, that to me is the worry, much more than Belarus.
Well, that's true. But with increased presence of the NATO troops, any movement against Poland the stake is higher than it was in 2014, right?
Well, the stake is going to continue to rise because Putin, the longer he's there, the more tenuous his grip on power becomes, the more he needs some sort of fig leaf creation to justify his power. And Putin has shown that when his power is in peril, he looks outward as a way to prove strength of Russia.
You've heard this, that the Russian media are accusing Poland for attempts to grab the Grodno or Brześć, and they try to convince Belarusian people that the site they really should be afraid of is Poland. How is it?
Look, I mean, the Russians, like the Chinese, when you come from these communist systems like North Korea, like Cuba, like Venezuela, the reportage and the truth shall never meet on the same page. They try and exercise social control through disinformation, internal and external narrative setting. It doesn't surprise me. It's obviously nonsense. Everyone knows it's nonsense. I mean, this is the same kind of dynamic my father wrote about in the 50s and 60s. You know, they tell us it's a banner crop year. Ignore the hunger in your bellies. People are smart enough to know it's the same thing in America with what the left is doing. People know that these are not peaceful protesters when they're throwing bricks through windows and beating people to death in the street. So when they lie this brazenly, it further weakens them ultimately. So it is what it is.
Yeah. European Union.
They're still around?
Sorry?
Okay. They're still around?
Yes, they are still around, and very much so, because they, this organization decided to take a loan from the international creditors and change their statute, basically, from just the international organization to the kind of state. And this federalistic movement is very much supported by Germany, Holland, and the other countries, and well, not so enthusiastically received here, but obviously there is money attached to that ticket, yep, and people want it. So will we have, in 10 or 20 years perspective, the federalistic state ruled by leftist Brussels elite?
No. No, you know what I've been putting forward about this for 5 years. I was very pro-Brexit. I was very connected to the leaders of Brexit, Nigel Farage, Raheem Kassam, Steve Bannon, Breitbart in the U.S., Breitbart London. I was a writer for Breitbart, and I was part of this sort of milieu, and we were pushing for Brexit and quite successfully setting the narrative and the frame for the British people who were being lied to by the media elite and political elite of both sides. And in Brexit, the elite had one goal, which was to maintain ties to the EU, because even though it was not optimal for British people, it was optimal for British corporatists and politicians funded by corporatists. It made for a less competitive Britain. Britain, I think, is doing well. The headline GDP number that you see is mostly a function of declining revenues in the paper trading sector, banking, insurance companies, the companies that move big money around. They have been hindered by the new border that's been created with the UK and European continent, and that's a good thing for the British people. I don't think that in 20 years there'll be an EU. I think that Britain was the inflection point of 60-something years, 70-something years. I view the EU as started in 1948 with the European Coal and Steel Commission. It was an economic pact on setting the price of coal and steel, because those were the necessary materials and inputs to wage war on an industrial level. So in 1948 to 2016, you had straight accretion, agglomeration, and a continued trend toward an enlarged European Union. 16, that inflects with Britain's departure, and I expect in the next few years we're going to see what I call quit the European Union movement from Italy. I think Salvini will be back. The Italians have been screwed by the political technocratic elite of Brussels multiple times the last 15 years. They've had their freely elected leaders pushed out in exchange for backroom cynical deals with opposition parties that are more towing a Brussels line. I think Salvini will be back, and I think at that point you will start to see an Italian exit movement take shape. If that takes shape, the contagion will go to Spain, Portugal, Greece.
Greece is those countries that are not happy with the centralistic government.
No, because they're being forced to adopt economic regimens that are not best for them and their people, but are best for Brussels, and really Brussels proxy, which is German banking system, Deutsche Bank specifically, but in general, the whole German banking system. And there's a reason why there's a rise of skeptical parties. Spain was the most committed of the southern European states, the Club Med, the Mediterranean states. Spain was the most committed to the project. It had the most connection to French academic Marxism. You look at some of the lefties who were high-ranking Spanish MEPs and leaders in the European Union. These are, the worst of the worst. And Vox is now ascendant. A Eurosceptic party is now doing 20-25% in hard left Spain. Sweden, it's not so surprising that the Swedish Democrats are between 25 and 30% and are the leading polling party, because there is no alternative in Sweden. It's either hard leftism, open borders, rape gangs, no-go zones, or the Swedish Dems, who are classically liberal, constitutionally oriented, and believe that a state exists as a sovereign with borders.
So if the reality you describe is real, not the business as usual, the solution for this Brussels elite is to grab as much power as they could now, rather than wait another few years.
But they keep trying to do that. And what's happened is over these last two European Union cycles, the rise of Eurosceptic parties has increased. And so right now we have enough in European Parliament. If we all work together, and I work with a lot of the Eurosceptic parties. I'm friendly with AfD, people in the Front National, the National Rally now, Liga Nord, Vox, Forum for Democracy in the Netherlands, Vlaams Belang in Belgium, and I see the Swedish Democrats, and I see Fidesz in Hungary, and I see all of these people, and here I am, a New York Jewish guy, and they'll say, oh, but they're anti-Semitic, you're supporting neo-Nazis. That's total nonsense. They're sovereigntist parties that some of them, like the Austrians with FPO, they've had some issues in the past, but politics is evolutionary, and the left would like to smear and label based on fact patterns that are not verifiably true anymore. So it's nonsense, the smearing goes on, but we do have, if we're willing to work together, these right-wing parties, enough of a block in the European Parliament to really start blocking things. And it's already started to happen. And of course, you don't see much coverage of it, because if it was widely covered by Der Spiegel, then people would realize the EU is weakening. So Der Spiegel will not cover it. The Guardian will not cover it. Figaro will not cover it. What was it? Le Monde will not cover it.
Right, but they are covering. Let us move now to the United States, and because this is important. We see, if we spoke in January, the election.
Well, we spoke on Facebook Messenger.
We did, and at that time,
because we're friends, not just interviewees.
Yeah, well, I'm honored. The election of Donald Trump, and pretty much continuation of the policy that he brought was certain, like 99%.
I don't think so. I think that the economy was strong pre-COVID, but the left thought that Trump. The polling is such nonsense, especially in the U.S. It suffers from Tory effect, and we'll get into it in a few minutes about the numbers that exist right now in the U.S. But there was a competitive Democratic primary season with quite a few candidates that might have captured the attention and energy of the American left, center left to far left. And what happened was none of them were viable enough for the Democratic establishment. They were too radical for the Democratic establishment. Bernie Sanders was probably going to be a front runner. And he's a full-on communist. He honeymooned in Moscow and Cuba and the Sandinistas he was a big proponent of, and Venezuela. I mean, this is a guy who really does believe Das Kapital and a critique of political economy, Marxist pablum and academic theory. And he was probably going to capture a lot of the youthful energy because the American far left is overt Marxist. And the Democratic establishment, which is really filled with corporatist whores, people that stand for very little beyond their own pocketbook, and then sell social justice, sell high-minded ideology to what their idiot followers, he was a threat to them. So they needed to clear out the field a little. Elizabeth Warren, same thing. They need to clear out the field a little, so they coordinated a successful bid for Joe Biden, who's one of their guys. He's been in D.C. halls of power for almost 50 years. Multi-term senator, 3-time presidential aspirant in the past. And they had to do a backroom deal to knock out the two others that might have given him a run, Amy Klobuchar and Pete Buttigieg. They wanted a guy they could control. This was a guy who captured no imagination. Everyone can see he's outwardly senile. He cannot get a sentence together. There's all sorts of crony corruption that everyone knows about with his son, with his brother, with his daughter. I mean, it's just we could write books. In fact, one of my mentors Peter Schweitzer, has written books about Biden family corruption, and there's more coming. He's got a new movie out this week, a documentary that you can get on YouTube about Biden family corruption. It's going to be great. Much like Clinton Cash, we distributed in 2016, and you were very helpful in me getting that air, which I appreciate. So they orchestrated a Biden nomination, and this does not inspire much hope. This was a guy who couldn't win primaries on his own. He was put together with Kamala Harris, a hard left activist, attorney general, and then senator of California, who slept her way into politics. This also does not inspire a lot of confidence. And she could not win a primary either. She was forced to drop out by the reality of that situation, that she was not popular on a nationwide level as she is in California. It's like the voters in Villanov, what's popular for them is not so popular in Łomża or Kielce or many other places where there are real people with real concerns, not out of touch elitists who are happy when the technocrats take over because they are the technocrats and they're friends of the technocrats. So I don't think Trump was 100% assured. I thought he would, because I do believe that there's a huge pocket of silent majority that has now been created by the Bannon-Trump stratagem of 2015-16. This is what Bannon taught Trump was, you're not a classical Republican, you're not a Democrat, you are a hybrid, a populist economic nationalist that is concerned with the workers, with the working class people, with the miners in Pennsylvania and the frackers, with the auto workers in Ohio and Michigan and the Wisconsin dairy farmers and the beet farmers and iron ore miners in Minnesota. And that's why the Rust Belt was where Trump won, because he broke down the right-left divide and the FDR Union Democrats became Republicans. It wasn't that they left the Democratic Party Party left them, because the Democratic Party went from a union working class party from FDR for the next following 60 years to a party of transgender bathroom debate and the party of progressive radicals like Elizabeth Warren and even Bernie Sanders. So this was interesting the way Trump broke this down, and I believe that he was very well positioned because of the pocketbook issues and the security issues that are so important to American workers, which are still the mass of our popular demographic, and that is wages. Wages grew more than they ever have. Household income was the highest it's ever been. Joblessness was the lowest. Minority joblessness, Hispanic and Black, was the lowest. So he was making a whole new tent based on economic nationalism and populism, and it resonated with the people, and the elites absolutely hated it because they're the anti-populists. They're the technocratic elite. On the spectrum of political affiliation, on a pragmatic level, you've got populists and the will of the people, and you've got technocratic elites who look to subvert the will of the people because they have a different priority and triage system of confederating powers to centralize them to their own interests, social justice, race to the bottom in labor costs. And this is an American right thing that has been very well integrated with the lefty elite, which is a race to the bottom in labor costs is good for the elite because they're corporatists, because they're the ones who run the big corporations. So when you've got open borders, especially in the American southern border, that degrades wages for the national working class. And so the populists argue against it. The technocratic elites of the left and the right are for it. And this is what Trump understood, what Bannon understood, and this is a big deal. The border issue is also key to one of the most important voting demographics, which is Hispanics. In 2016, you had an election that hinged on the Democrat Union Rust Belt, the FDR Dems we talked about in Michigan, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Wisconsin, Minnesota. He only lost by a point, a very progressive state, but with a heavy working class, industrial class. So these are states he's going to win by massive margins now. But the hinge point is not just that region in 2020. It's, in my view, the American Southwest, where you have a heavy Hispanic voting demographic. It's Arizona, Nevada, New Mexico, Colorado. Southern California and Texas are what they are. California will still be Democrat, Texas will still be Republican. But those four states, Colorado, Nevada, Arizona, New Mexico, with heavy Hispanic populations, are all swing states. And Trump got 28% of the Hispanic vote in 16. I think he gets 40+% of the Hispanic vote in 2020, because these are the states that have to deal with the open border and the problems that have come from open borders policies for the last 20 and 30 years. It's Hispanic working class people, many who are legal immigrants, immigrants, but these are legally voting citizens who, with the right to vote, say, it's in my best interest to have a border wall and controlled flow from the border, because it's my wages that are degraded. It's my kids in Albuquerque, New Mexico, very close to the border, that have to deal with cartel gang wars in the drug trade, and that my kids going to their public high school in Albuquerque are the ones that might get hit with a stray bullet. So they are very cognizant of these risk points and factors, and they will, in the voting booth, pull the lever for Trump at a higher rate than Hispanics have ever done so before. We also have blacks who have seen the lowest level of joblessness, criminal justice reform. They voted 8% for Trump in 2016, which was very high because the black vote has been controlled by the Democratic left with dispensations and social spending. But now blacks see, because Trump has been very friendly to black interests and needs. Historically, black universities are well funded. The joblessness statistic. I think he goes from 8% to 20 to 25%. Goes from up to a fifth to a quarter of the black voting electorate, those who actually go out and vote. That's a game changer. These are landslide numbers. I believe he wins by 10+% in the popular vote and by 200 points in the electoral vote. He wins all the states he won in 16, plus the swing states, Minnesota, New Hampshire, Colorado, Nevada, New Mexico, and he even puts New Jersey and Connecticut and Virginia in play, sort of Democrat states. So I think there's a huge silent majority, and there's a huge Tory effect where people are scared to vote for him or admit they're voting for him to pollsters. So you've got an embedded polling skew because people are so scared with what the left has done to the society. And this is even before we see these terrorist Marxist movements of BLM and Antifa start to burn down the cities. Even before the burning down the cities, we've seen for the last year or two, if you support Trump, we try and get you fired from your job so you can never work again and provide for your family. So people are not truthful when a pollster calls them. This is called Tory effect because this was the same thing in the 80s with Margaret Thatcher versus the Labour Party. The elites that did the polling would go around the country, and the working class people were scared of the implication of admitting that they were voting for Thatcher, not Labour, especially in places that were Labour strongholds. So this concept, I think, is very prevalent in the U.S. today, and I think Trump is really a popular president. I go all over the country. Even this year, where there's been limited travel, I've been in a dozen states, and there are Trump bumper stickers, hats everywhere. In the cities, you cannot wear anything Trump because you'll literally get beat up. And this is like the brown shirts in the 30s, the Tsarist secret police, the Jacobins of the French Revolution. Americans recognize that, and they know something's rotten in the country when that's the case.
You may not. This lady in Washington, D.C.,
yeah,
who was in the restaurant surrounded by the screaming crowd.
Yeah, the mob.
That basically they want her to put the fist in the air and they would go, but she refused. How much is this similar to this picture from 1930s in Germany?
It's exactly the same.
Who did just like that,
yeah,
instead of...
I mean, people generally care about the security and sanctity and integrity of their society. It's an existential priority for people to, A, have a good economy so that they can feed and provide for their families and have prosperity that they can leave to their kids, a more prosperous nation, and security. And we've got roving bands of brown shirts and Gestapo types who are literally beating people up for not saying, I'm a racist white person and I stand with the anti-racist movement. They are engaging in aggressive violence. The fact that a lot of people don't like Trump, his style, even his policy, but most of those people don't believe that somebody who does support Trump should get beat up for it, or if he's wearing a t-shirt supportive of Trump, that he should be beat to death. And this is what's now happening. The left realized they had a tenuous hold on even the option of retaking power in the White House or the Capitol Hill. I actually think that the right, because of the strength of Trump's mandate, is going to blow out the Senate and the House as well. The Democrats can inspire attendance, especially with someone like Joe Biden at the top of the ticket and Kamala Harris. I think they get hurt down ballot. They lose Senate races. They lose House seats. We take back the House. Most Americans didn't support impeachment, so those 20 or so Trump voting districts that then went to the left in 2018, we're going to take them all back and then some. We're going to flip a lot of seats. I believe that this is going to be a landslide not seen, the likes of which have not been seen in scale and mandate since 1984, where Reagan won every single state except Minnesota, one of the leftiest states where his opponent Walter Mondale was from. Trump will definitely now win Minnesota. I thought he'd win Minnesota last time. He only lost it by 1 point. He would have won it already coming into this year, and then they started burning down the cities with a leftist propelled race race war, riots, and the lefty media, mainstream platforms say, oh, nothing to see here, peaceful protests, and there are burning buildings in the background over the shoulder of the reporters.
Right,
so again,
right.
it's like we talk about, it's the Soviet style of truth disinformation and narrative setting, and Americans are smart enough to see it. We've got modern technology and distribution mechanisms for information. Individual citizen with an iPhone is a more honest and important reporter than Jim Acosta of CNN, who lies all the time.
Let me ask you one question. First of all, is
just one?
About a lot of questions, but connected to this. You mentioned that Democrats, the Democratic Party is a different party that it was, say, 20 years ago.
Progressive radicals. Bill Clinton Democrats were rational, fiscally conservative, economically minded, sensitive to the working class Democrats.
Right.
After Obama, who was a radical Marxist activist, I knew him in Chicago in the late 90s. I knew who he was. I was sounding the alarm. He was able to sell America on him being a centrist because he was an amazing communicator, very polished, highly intelligent and knowledgeable, and knew that America was yearning for some sort of hope that especially a post-racial election would deliver, curing some of the wounds that we have with race in the country for hundreds of years. And for him to get elected is quite proof positive of America's post-racial ethos and high integrity, honest society. And then he comes in and he acts like the radical leftist, trying to nationalize healthcare, making everything about race. So he opened up the wounds even further, even though he was supposed to solve them. And that really migrated the party further to the left, as well as
identity policy, right?
The identity politics. And then you have the universities who had met their apotheosis in 2016 of radical left censorship, censoring conservative speakers. And really what happened with the universities, just like the media elite and the political leftist media elite, the politicians as well as their hand-holding, water-carrying media, is that the people who are running these institutions were the same people who were the students in the late 60s who were pushing the countercultural revolution forward with Saul Alinsky tactics of the ends justify the means to deliver socialist utopia from a Marxist framework. Very hostile to capitalism and free markets, which is what built America, which is what also helped build Europe into new heights of innovation and prosperity. So these are the people who were doing the sit-ins and the burning the American flag and the protesting the war, and their most radical Marxist violent fringes, the Weather Underground, the Black Panthers, were bombing police precincts, killing cops, bombing Fort Dix, the military installation in New Jersey, to protest the Vietnam War. And these are the people now running the institutions that set the narrative and that educate the next generation with the ivory tower universities, the media, and you can see how they behave. You can see how they believe that anybody who's got a differing opinion than them has to be canceled, has to be pushed out, cannot be given a platform to speak. And they actually believe, because this is a religious cult for them, they have thrown away Western civilization's precepts and fundaments of religion and God and higher order values and methodologies, the Ten Commandments, the fact that the natural rights as given by God are what creates the democracy and the social compact in a constitutional republic. They have rejected all of that for the last 50 years, and we're seeing what that culminates in. This is the end result, that they're going around burning buildings in the name of fighting racism and destroying the livelihoods of innocent small business men and women, mostly black and Hispanic, in the neighborhoods in which they live. It's absolutely obscene.
People are posting the begging cards, like they beg not to destroy this particular business because this is all I have and I'm single mother.
Yeah, they don't care. They don't care. This is the mob, and the mob doesn't understand that natural rights of liberty as given by God, because they've rejected God. Their God is the state and the mob, and the state is the mob. Unless you have good Republican constitutional ideals, and a democracy in its purest form is problematic. It's mob rule, tyranny of the mob. The 51% can vote the 49% off the island, or if they're cannibals, into their stomachs. And this is a problem that is solved by the Enlightenment thought of John Locke and Hobbes, and the greatest thinkers that humanity has ever known, that delivered the right philosophies at the right time in the second half of the 18th century to the American founders fighting the British monarchy for independence and codifying it as perfectly as it's ever been done in the American Constitution, thus creating a republic. As Ben Franklin said, a republic if you can keep it. And we have to fight that battle all the time against the left that absolutely is in opposition to the republic. They want the tyranny of the mob. They are the mob. And to them, the God is the state, not the natural order as given by God.
So
the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
I got a homework for you.
Wonderful.
Research the Polish political thinkers of the 16th century, when you found very much the same ideas.
Poland was always way ahead of its time in constitutional frameworks and freedoms because of the imperialization that Poles had faced for the better part of 700-800 years from all the different sides. They knew that freedom was to be delivered through codified constitutional value frameworks. And this is one of the reasons why Poland was the first to adopt an American-style constitution at the end of the 18th century.
The America adopted the Polish-style law in the end of the 18th century, which we had since about 200 years.
Look, I'm a big believer in what Jan Zamoyski said when he founded Zamość. Pay your tax. He doesn't care where you're from, especially Jews coming after the Spanish Inquisition into this part of the world. But you know, everything from every part of Europe. Come here to Zamość. I will sell you in a part of my master planned real estate community. Pay your taxes, and if somebody comes from outside and tries to steal from us, take up arms together. And he put together a framework of this almost city-state republic that I think is very romantic and was way ahead of its time.
Oh, the Zamość is an amazing place, and please visit one if you will have a chance. Let us go to the. You mentioned the wizards of 1968 that are transforming the society right now as teachers and so on and so on. They've also thought that people in the end of 80s and beginning of the 90s, which eventually turned to online billionaires right now, and they own the Facebooks and Twitters, Snapchats, and so on of today, and they openly say that they will cancel the conservative.
Yeah, they're trying to do it.
thoughts.
Facebook's actually better. Twitter's pretty bad. So you know that I co-run a group, work very closely as a manager in a sense. I'm on the board of Project Veritas. James O'Keefe, the innovative, revolutionary undercover journalist. I mean, he's brought undercover journalism, which is a proud history from Jacob Riis and Ida Tarbell and Upton Sinclair in the first part of the 20th century, going after the excesses when capital really did abuse labor. The pendulum swung, unions were formed as an antidote, trusts were broken by Teddy Roosevelt for more competitive, non-monopolistic, oligopolistic practices. But it was the undercover journalists who helped expose that in a big way and lead to reform. You had great undercover journalism in Chicago in the second half of the 20th century. But the journalism that existed after that was media elite trying to coerce a narrative. And James does serious undercover work to show that they're lying, cheating, and stealing. So it's very, very important, and it's the kind of thing I think we need in Poland that we're doing in the US, and we did with Twitter. And we showed that Twitter tech people were bragging about how they created specialized algorithms to put people who have, Trump in their bio, or MAGA, or Second Amendment, or anything that would denote you and give you away as a vociferous conservative, or Republican, or pro-Trump, and they would shadow ban them. And so we aired that in January 18, I think it was, and by March 18, I was shadow banned where nobody sees my Twitter activity. It just a tree falls in the forest. So yes, they are very censorious, they're very coercive, and there will be regulation coming in Trump's second term about what it is that the digital town square where debate happens has now been privatized, and they're trying to control it. They're trying to control what is said and distributed. Facebook's a little better, but now they're going to minimize the political advertising that exists ahead of a campaign. Trump won the campaign in 2016 in very large part due to social media strategy, where he was able to get the message out very broadly.
So what I'm saying is,
and Facebook is going, but
these people will make everything they can do not to allow Trump to spread his
Google
news.
is the biggest worry, because Google is the tool that everybody uses for everything. And so the ability for Google to swing an election, there's a great documentary, The Creepy Line, by Matthew Taylor, and with Peter Schweitzer and with Robert Epstein, a Hillary Clinton voter, where they did, I would love to get this aired in Poland, where they did a serious breakdown of how Google, Apple, Facebook, how big tech, who has all your information, can try and swing your vote, and how they've been trying to do so since 2016.
So
Scary stuff.
will they successfully swing the votes in 2020?
No, and here's where they're going to try, but here's where their censoriousness meets reality. They live in a cocoon, in a hive mind of leftists. They don't understand the scale of mandate that's coming for Trump. The vast majority of the country supports him. I would actually put his base approval rating, and you're not getting this from polling, over 60%. And voting for him, is going to be higher than that even, I think.
Okay.
So
we spoke already about Democratic Party, so now let's turn to the Republicans, because the Republicans in 2016 are not the same party as in 2020.
yeah, it's a way better party. Way better party. Way better party. It's a party that did exactly what Bannon set out to do when he basically selected Trump, where he educated Trump in the tools necessary to make the Republican Party a populist conservative party. I've always said that, and you can go back to Tocqueville in 1830s.
Because the Republican of the past are another ivory tower, with the extremely rich people sitting on the top and looking every time down.
Correct. A party of plutocratic elite that were highly focused on the corporatist sector, lower taxes for the corporates, and also open borders for cheap labor and a race to the bottom in labor costs. Offshore jobs, fine, great, better for shareholders, of which they are the shareholding class. Bannon recognized what this was becoming, and he saw in Trump a standard bearer, a tribune, who could go forward, and because of his history as an almost like P.T. Barnum-like figure, larger-than-life American billionaire real estate developer from the private sector who is just as comfortable in a boardroom as he is talking to the hard hats constructing his buildings. A guy with an incredible retail touch that was well borne out in 20 years of reality celebrity television, which he built. He built that with The Celebrity Apprentice starting in the early 2000s. And so America knew him. America knew he wasn't a racist. In the early 2000s, the NAACP, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, the leading, oldest civil rights organization for African-American black interests and civil rights battles, they gave him their annual Image Award for being such a friend to black interests. So all of a sudden, when he becomes a threat to this class of organizer, which are also part of the elite, the lefty elite, then all of a sudden he's a racist neo-Nazi. This is a guy who had the first Jewish member of Mar-a-Lago, his club, but he's an anti-Semite according to the Jewish left. And the Jewish left is, they're not even Jews, they're just leftists. And anybody who has a qualifier on I'm this sort of leftist, get rid of it. It means nothing. They are leftists. That is the religion. There is no need for further qualification along ethnic or religious lines because they reject anything that might benefit a group who wants to compete because for them they're just the mob.
Let us focus on the present-day Republicans, who they are.
So they are a workers' party now. They're a conservative workers' party. This country, America, is a silent majority conservative country. You pick it up in the 1830s with Tocqueville. He recognized the frameworks were in place. Church attendance, communitarian nature of town structure where there is mutual aid and charity and Americans looking out for Americans. There's a good value system. The Constitution is one predicated on the Old and New Testament's best precepts for social and political governance, from the Ten Commandments to moral code to natural rights, the pursuit of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. These are free. It's not a coincidence that the Bill of Rights, which is the first 10 amendments to the Constitution, which are sacrosanct, it's 10, and it's like the 10 Commandments. First Amendment, free speech, free exercise of religion, free association and assembly. The ability to protest and to go to your government with a list of grievances where you seek redress and an address of your grievances. That's protest. That's the First Amendment. Second Amendment, the right to bear arms. You have a natural right as given by God to defend yourself and your life. It's not coincidental. The Second Amendment follows the First Amendment. The First Amendment is the purest natural rights given by God. The Second Amendment enforces it. It protects it. Your right to protect yourself with whatever weapon you can have access to and to operate in order of the furtherance of protection of your rights is given to you by God. And so these are fundamental things that make America a conservative nation. It wasn't until Woodrow Wilson and the progressive movement that this big style leftist progressivism that then morphed and evolved into even further radicalism and even flirting with Marxism. But it wasn't until then that there was even these kind of debates. So the Republican Party, which is the party of Abraham Lincoln, built to preserve the Union and fight slavery, to fight a war to eradicate this original sin of America, which is a Southern Democrat sin, tells you the chicanery and the sleight of hand the Democrats have been engaged in. It was Woodrow Wilson, who was progressive. It was FDR, who's a Democrat, who co-opted the word liberal. Liberal was classical liberal and a conservative ideal of liberty. It was Enlightenment thinkers, Voltaire, Rousseau, Locke, Hobbes. This was liberalism. FDR, with the New Deal, said the new liberalism is not just freedom, but freedom from want. Freedom from being hungry, freedom from being at risk of having to fend for yourself. And that introduced the era of big government. It was put on steroids in 1969 with uber-Democrat President Lyndon Baines Johnson, who introduced the Great Society, which gave the creation and expansion of social welfare programs. And as he said, if I can get this passed, I will have those N-words, the pejorative for black people, the dirtiest word in the English language, given the historical loading of it and what it did in oppression of American people. I will have those N-words voting Democrat for a century. He expanded what Allen West, a great black congressman and friend of mine, calls the government plantation. Putting blacks on welfare, eradicating the black family structure, trying to eradicate black charities that are focused on church centers, and making the government, the federal government, the state government, their giver of everything, of life. So instead of life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness, it is welfare, social programs, and indoctrination in public school systems, where the incentive is to keep people indoctrinated and enslaved ideologically, mentally, so that they always vote for the left, who's feeding them. And this has now, 3 generations from that, opened eyes to how bad the situation is. And blacks recognize that Trump is giving them the opportunity for jobs by deregulating a highly regulated economy, which is leading to wage growth and job opportunities and higher household income and lower joblessness. So this is, they're awake. They're waking up as to what LBJ did, putting them in the projects, in public housing, and on welfare, and eradicating, creating an incentive structure where young unwed mothers get more from the government by having more and more kids than they do from going out and seeking a job and working for themselves. And the cultural implications of being a ward of the state are rife. And you see it in the neighborhoods I grew up in Brooklyn, or lived in the south side of Chicago when I attended UChicago, University of Chicago. You see the hopelessness, the violence, the crime, the ugliness, the cultural anarchy. And so now there's a reversal going on, and the Republican Party is the friend of this. It is a friend of the working class. It is fighting to get jobs back that were offshored to China. It is fighting for the bilateral trade deals that undermined United States workers, Americans workers' interests. NAFTA, which was signed in the 90s under Clinton. Well, it's been reversed. It's now the USMCA. And it is doing an amazing job for the upper Rust Belt, who were getting their ass kicked by Canada in agricultural and like mining trade. Environmental rules. You don't have a country, there's a great question Tucker Carlson asks. Are you a economy with a country or a country with an economy? And conservatives would hopefully, and I've been guilty of this myself. I was an Austrian economist for years who believed in the free market and the race to the bottom in labor costs. And I still believe in competitive free market forces very, very highly. But we do have to protect the fact that we have a culture and a country, and the economy has to serve that, not vice versa. The Republican Party of Mitt Romney was a race to the bottom of labor costs, two labor costs. Create them as low as possible so Bain Private Equity's company portfolio holding of companies would do better, and he would get another mansion in Lake Winnipesaukee, New Hampshire, outside Boston, where he was governor of the state, but then he lived in New Hampshire because of taxes. So these people are all hypocrites and frauds. They do not have your best interests at heart. And Trump does. He doesn't want any money. His business has suffered so much thanks to what the left has done. He could have made another $1 billion in the last 10 to 15 years of his life. Real estate developments all over the world. His golf course portfolio. All of it. It suffered incredibly for him deciding that he would throw his hat in and serve the American people with his knowledge base, his deal making. His deal making led to a stronger NATO. His deal making led to better conditions for American workers. He was elected with what Bannon taught him on a America First paradigm, which is a form of taking Westphalian sovereignty back. You work for those who vote for you. The EU would subjugate all of the citizenries of these free republics with Sikorsky selling sovereignty to Berlin and Brussels for cash in bags, metaphorically. This was not in the best interest of the Polish people. It was in the best interest of the European technocratic elite, who did very well with this structure, just as the American Republicans did. If you devolve your powers or accrete your powers upward toward a federalist system with a pinnacle at the top, whether that's Washington, D.C. or Brussels, then you are undermining the sovereign rights and will of those people on the ground who are giving voting mandates to the heads of the states in their countries. And that's why you've had this shift to the right, especially in Central Europe. Central Europe remembers communism, Iron Curtain Sovietism, where the powers were devolved to Moscow, and they were not a free people. And the EU has too many characteristics that too many people who remember this time look congruent. And as a result, we see these moves to the right. And Trump, it's the same thing in the US. There's a reason Trump and Poland have a better alignment than any other country in Europe, because they were electing the same mandate. It was when I was meeting with Kaczynski, and I was putting the red Make America Great Again hat, the MAGA hat, on my head, and Kaczynski took it from my hand and put it on his head. He knew what he was doing. He knew the implications of the philosophical and political cultural alignment, even economic alignment on some degree. Maybe a little more socialist here than in the US, but there is a workers' party, working class is the motivating factor. These are the people we need to help, not the wealthy elite in the big cities, the wine and cheese crowd that Anne Applebaum writes about in her shitty book, Twilight of Democracy, that just came out, where she complains about everybody moving to the right. They're all bad people because they don't agree with my technocratic leftist elitism. When Kaczynski put that hat on, and I sent that picture to the White House, to Bannon and Gorka and others, that's when they realized, oh my God, this guy gets us. This country, this move to the right that they experienced is so much similar to our own in 2016. It's not a coincidence that they then had their first state visit to Warsaw and gave this great speech in July 2017. And I'd like to think that I had a small role to play, or a role to play, in doing so by creating this optical image that these guys don't hate us, they're our friends. We're elected on the same cultural and political mandates. And it's a good thing. And what Bannon and Trump did, and I say Bannon because I was with Bannon in Cannes 2016, and he was getting calls from, this was May 2016 at the Cannes Film Festival for Clinton Cash, and I was with Steve Bannon, and he was getting calls from Trump every 10 minutes. What do we think about this? What do we think about that? So there is a Rasputin-like mastermind to some degree, whether Trump likes that reality or not. Without Bannon and Stephen Miller, who was a Bannonite, Jeff Sessions' legislative director, he wouldn't have understood the depth of the immigration problem, the scale of it, the economic implications of the immigration problem. China. Steve Bannon has been the largest, most vocal voice saying China's a threat. And
in 2016, few people realized that
he did. Bannon did.
Right.
And that's why he got.
Right now,
and that's why
it's a
he
topic of the mainstream.
Bannon skates to where the puck is going, and this is why I consider him a mentor, because I am really impressed with his way of thinking. We don't agree about everything, but and as he said when I was on a War Room podcast talking about the Polish election a month and a half ago, he said as we're closing, and I needed to get somewhere, so I only did a 15-minute segment. He said, one of the smarter, better thinkers that you should follow if you can get past his abrasive personality. That's what Bannon said about me, which was like a joke, but very, very funny, because we butt heads on some stuff, and it's even on Russia, he was a little bit too willing to get into détente with Russia, and I fought him on it, and I think he recognizes now that Russia will not be our friend. They will never love us. His view was that if we don't engage Russia, China will, and the China-Russian axis will be very, very harmful to U.S. and European first world developed world interests. And my point to him was, Russia's still run by the same power structures under communism. China, same thing. It's the communist nation since Mao and Chiang Kai-shek. That period, they are the same kind of evil, kleptocratic thugs, authoritarians, evil mofos. They are going to be in bed together where you think you can get Russia on the side because of Christianity and Judeo-Christian values. Not going to happen. The Judeo-Christian Western civilized frameworks that Putin claims to care about is a fig leaf. He doesn't care anything about any of it. If he was a man of God, he would not murder everybody. He is as evil as it gets, so it makes sense that him and the Chinese are going to be in bed together. And as Bannon always says, the Chinese people are the best people in the world. But they are held into a servitude, a slavery to a oppressive system that is the Chinese Communist Party, that has been the strongest Communist Party since Soviet times, maybe stronger. They're so strong they can flirt with capitalism to increase their own powers. The Soviet system could not do that. It would have broken from it. So the Chinese CCP is even stronger, in my view, than the Soviet communist system of the Politburo of Russia, of Moscow, of the Kremlin.
What is significant is this sudden assertiveness of the China diplomats who are yelling in the countries they are sent to. They are trying to make things in order and showing how powerful their country is, which is normally not the way the diplomats are behaving.
And especially Chinese diplomats. They played a long game because they've been basically running roughshod around us. They've been colonizing and imperializing the Central Europe with One Belt, One Road, and the New Silk Road, telecommunications infrastructure, road infrastructure, strategic investments in finance, retail, consumer, all of it. They were, working hard doing this in the U.S. We see the scandals that are now getting exposed because Trump's head of state and because Bannon sounded the warning about China. Now we see they had been trying to colonize our universities, put their academics in there to steal the intellectual property of America's leading innovators in the university setting, in the corporate setting. They did, and then, Bannon and Trump were, Bannon was very successful in getting Trump to see the China problem and the China risk, and then really start the pushback with trade, and putting a guy named Peter Navarro in as the close advisor on trade. And this is another China hawk who realizes what China has been doing for the last 30 years, really almost the last 50 years. When Nixon opened up ties with China, China played the long game. They saw that, with a little bit of Western relations and an injection into state-controlled capitalism, crony capitalism, socialist capitalism, if you will, that they could migrate because they've got a great workforce, great entrepreneurial, or maybe not entrepreneurial, but diligent, high-quality, intelligent populace willing to work hard. They could migrate up the chain in economic development, and they did very quickly at very, very high internalized growth rates. And then they became the dumping ground for America, for American labor. They undermined the American labor cost structure dramatically through the billion people they have brought online to work for the West in manufacturing.
Active cooperation from the American elites.
Yeah, and on both sides. Joe Biden talking about China, super in bed with China, and then his son happens to be getting billion-dollar investments for an investment fund from Chinese national banks and CCP-tied investment entities. So that's on the left, and on the right, Mitt Romney and the private equity titans, all looking to do more with China. So, Trump recognized this, Bannon recognized this, and then the American worker recognized this because the American worker saw the jobs going offshore to China and seeing them, Youngstown, Ohio is a great example of a town that was decimated. And then you had COVID, and that has opened the eyes of everybody. You already had Huawei opening the eyes of a lot of people. Here in Poland with that spy we caught 2 years ago. In the UK, they started to recognize it. You had a lot of good people in DC on the right who were sounding the alarm about a Huawei network build-out and rollout of this telecommunications infrastructure and what that would do to the West. That would weaken the West because there's a backdoor into all the information of the West, including the spying. The industrial level spying espionage that the Chinese would have been able to, already doing at a very high level, but would have been able to do and control for the next 40 years or more if they would have built out the entire 5G for the Western world, for US and Europe with the Huawei, Huawei would never succeed on its own. It is a CCP company. It is subsidized by the CCP with one goal, a backdoor into the intelligence of every Western nation so that one day they can take us over. That they play the long game. And Bannon was warning about this. Then you have COVID, and we saw what happened. It's no secret what they did. China virus, Wuhan flu. Only the media could call something like that racist. calling where, Ebola was from Ebola. West Nile was from West Nile. Zika was from Zika. Wuhan virus. Oh, that's racist. You can't do that.
Right.
I mean, these people are so full of shit, it's scary. And it's tragic and it's comic at the same time, and that's why they're losing. But China virus, Wuhan flu, gets exported all over the world because China lost control internally, and they knew that they could not suffer a relative downgrade to the West. So they needed everybody to get hit so that China's economic standing would be commensurately negatively adversely impacted as the West, as the US, as Western Europe.
Is the timing just by accident or
Yeah,
accidental?
I'm a big believer in some conspiracy theories and I reject others. I think with the Wuhan flu, I think it was a bioengineered weapon. I don't think they set it off on purpose because they got hurt by it as well. I think they were experimenting with bioweapons. And the reason I think this, and we've talked in the past, I've got a biotechnology background. Professionally, I was a healthcare analyst for many, many years, and I still do a lot with biotechnology and drug development. And so I do know a little bit about the science of disease. And my own view is that this was bioengineered between the strains of influenza, which is the most transmittable. You cough, you spit, you pick up influenza, you transmit it, and it's quickly incubated and spread, and HIV. There are characters and proof that there's an HIV strain component to this coronavirus. And HIV is a very interesting virus because you can carry it in your body for decades and it never does anything. You could be a transmitter, you can spread it asymptomatically, or you can have it symptomatically. And then what's really interesting, and this is something that I've never seen before, I'm not an epidemiologist, I'm not an expert on viruses, but the idea that you could have the virus, you could develop the symptoms, you could suffer from it, then your body can beat it and you'll naturally have the immunodeveloped antigens, and then you can still transmit it afterwards. You can still carry it afterwards. That to me is very novel. But all of these things point to bioengineering, and this would be the perfect bioengineered viral weapon because of the ease of transmittability, like the influenza, as well as the uncharacteristic hidden carrier characteristic, that you could carry it so well. Whether you had it or you don't have it, you could be a carrier. This makes it a very potentially virulent weapon. So I do think that it was exported once they lost control of it. And my guess is the Chinese are not great on environmental adherence or even sanitary conditions in many of their big cities. And my guess is that instead of incinerating the viral samples that they're experimenting on, they threw them in a plastic bag in a dumpster outside and it spread. And then they went to the Wuhan wet market, and they said there's a bat here, and there's a rat, and there's a pangolin, and there's all this other crap, and that's where it spread from. So I think they exported it because they needed to make sure everyone else suffered for it. I think they probably thought at the time that, okay, well, the benefit from this as well is that this might hurt Trump's presidency so much that the challenger, whoever that may be, and Biden would be great for them. So when it was Biden who was selected, they were in hog heaven because he's been a close friend to their, he's never said a bad word about China. He's been on the take. His family's been getting tons of money from China. So I think they probably were very happy to see it spread widely to the US, and they probably helped have a hand in making sure that happened more quickly. They also cornered the market on PPE, personal protective equipment, and then when they charitably shared it with other countries, they shared the crap that was defective. So these are horrible actors, and they will have their comeuppance in a Trump second term. Part of the reason why Americans appreciate Trump is they know he is not going to be an agent of the Chinese and the CCP. He's going to hold them to account. He's going to go after them. He's done it in trade, and he's won in these pissing stare-down contests with them over trade to the benefit of the American worker. So I think that China's a threat, and I think Trump is the best person in the world to be at the forefront of handling that threat.
Right. It was after the Second World War when the European powers basically crashed down due to the war, and the United States rose to the dominance as a financial, social, scientific center of the world. And
it's also because we have the strongest constitution that protects property rights the best. That's why innovation happens in the U.S. in a better scenario. The capitalist system in the U.S. that is codified by free enterprise in the Constitution allows for these things.
But the question is, are we witnessing the end of it with and this system is going to be replaced by some dual power between China empire and its clients and West. Is
No,
it still,
I think
because that was the case in 2016, right? We read the newspapers, like serious ones, like The Economist, saying that the America, U.S.-China duopoly is going to replace.
The Economist has been wrong about everything because it's Brussels and Washington and London, technocratic elites. Like, look at how, what's his name, Ed Lucas, who is the head of the Polish and Central Europe correspondence for The Economist, the editor for that region. Annabelle Chapman writes for The Economist. I mean, one of the dumbest journalistic correspondents I've ever seen, who's so emotionally connected to her confirmation bias. They're wrong about everything. We see it borne out over and over again. These are the same people like Francis Fukuyama, who wrote after the Berlin Wall fell, the end of history, that everything would trend toward the American technocratic elite and the world would look like Washington, D.C. And how wrong has how wrong has that thesis been proven? Look at the Middle East. Look at the failed nation building of those neocons that were subscribing to this end of history theorem, political science theory. I think that we are in an American renaissance, that under Trump, by asserting American sovereignty back, by not ceding our sovereignty and our sovereign decision-making capacity to multilateral globalist bodies, the UN, the World Bank, the IMF, the European Union. Look at the World Health Organization. I did an interview with you a couple years ago where we talked, right here I think, where we talked about globalist bodies, mentioning all those, and I said as one of them, the World Trade Organization and the World Health Organization. And look at what the World Health Organization, I was on record 2 years ago that it's these globalist bodies that are all corrupted by technocratic elitism that is more interested in their political agendas and priorities and taking over and control of power structures. So the WHO, which everyone said, who doesn't support the WHO, the World Health Organization? I didn't, because I knew what they were. These are the same people at Bilderberg, in Brussels, in DC, at the Atlantic Council, and their important triage is political power. It's not some sort of issue-based mandate. And look at how they behaved and performed under the COVID debacle. It turns out they've been fully captured by China over the last 5 years. We didn't know that, but we saw it now. The curtain was pulled back beyond this Wizard of Oz where there are guys moving the levers, and they would not condemn the Chinese for their reaction. They even did condemn the US for shutting the border with China. So these people are incompetent technocrat political whores who will go where the money is and where the political control is, and all of these globalist bodies are agenda-laden with the same agenda, and it is antithetical to the agenda of the working peoples of the developed world, the US and the UK and the European Union and the constituent states, with of course some exceptions like France and Germany that set the EU agenda, and they are these technocrats. The French have no work ethic and unions that have halted the productivity of the country, and the Germans have a banking sector that runs the entire political regimen to the detriment of European Union constituent state member populace. So I think that these things have been exposed. Trump's Make America Great Again, sovereigntist focus, the Westphalian sovereignty creeping back into the European nations. This is boding well for the 21st century. I believe the European Union should further weaken and devolve powers to the member states. And that will be also a next leg of a renaissance in the 21st century. Hopefully we see in other parts of the world things like the Middle East, conflicts like the Middle East. When Trump orchestrates the United Arab Emirates Israeli détente, that's a great thing, that bodes well. Islam needs a reformation, much like the Catholic Church had a reformation, the Protestant Reformation, which did allow a little bit of competition. The Catholic Church was highly corrupted in the 12th, 13th, 14th century, selling indulgences. If you bought dispensations from sin, was not the ideal framework of a church. So there was a pendulum shift. People said this is not honest, and it injected some healthy competition, and the church became more honest as a result. Islam needs that same sort of reformation.
I'm deeply moved with your drive to preserve honesty in Catholic Church.
I believe the Catholic Church is a great force for good, thanks to many great figures like Jan Pavel, but it gets corrupted again very easily, like every institution does, and every global institution further. I think this Pope from the Argentinian Marxist, Francis, he's horrible. I mean, he needs to, read everything Jan Pavel wrote and adopt Jan Pavel's views, because that was a great Pope.
That was a great Pope, that was a great thinker.
Great human being, and a great friend of my father's.
And saint, basically.
Yeah, he was a secular saint, non-secular saint, and,
there's another, you mentioned that you see the upcoming renaissance of the West, and
Yes. Because the West is waking up to the pernicious ideals of the left and what they do. Most of the Western denizens believe in free speech. If you're someone on the ground, you believe in free speech. And when your cultural elites are telling you, from a leftist perspective, free speech has to be eradicated so we can all be safety and live in harmony, all have security and live in harmony, and how are they going to enforce that? Bricks through windows, burning down cities, burning down small businesses, killing this black St. Louis retired policeman, David Dorn. So, Black Lives Matter unless they're Black lives who aren't looting, rioting, and committing arson.
Yeah, the thing that really strikes me in the United States is the return to Christianism, to Christian values by Donald Trump. That's something that...
We want God, because he knows that the natural rights that are espoused, well, even if you don't believe in God, the fact that you believe there's something bigger than the state preserves the most important rights of humanity that lead to freedom and the ability to set your own path. And so when he says we want God, this resonates even with people I know on the right who are not religious, or those on the left who are not full-on leftist radical. They understand that the state should be subjugated to a natural order of natural rights, of these freedoms that can only be bestowed upon from a higher power. And the state can then break them, and thus the state needs to be subservient to that natural order. This is what we see with communism and the command autocracies, is the rejection of God means I am the state. The leader of the state is the leader of all morality, and morality is truth. There is no state-declared morality. If it was up to Kamala Harris, who's encouraging the riots, the morality would be burn down the buildings and beat people with sticks if they don't agree with your cause. Well, that is not a morality. That's a statist morality. But a real morality comes from God because it's above the state.
Right. What is new these days is that we used to be taught that the people who believe in God, who keep the values, they basically come from the low-income families, some are from the countryside, and they are basically backwards.
Those are the best people in the world. They actually work hard.
Now you go to the press conference on Kali McEnany, and you see that this lady has a cross on a very visible point, put on purpose, because you cannot do it in offices across the United Kingdom. You cannot do it in France. You better don't do it in Germany, because all the Germans are leftists, at least if they are on the upper side of the echelons of their society. So this is a sign of something new.
Well, they've subjugated this natural order of higher value morality to their own egos, which is, I am the state, I am the technocrat, I am the well-educated, I am the elite, and my moral system comes from my own codification. And that's where maybe it starts off in good faith, but what happens is without that bedrock of principle, of the 10 Commandments, of the Bill of Rights in the US, where you have a constitution that is codified on these higher order religious values, you start to see the descent into cultural anarchy and madness and BLM and Jacobins and the French Revolution. Look, the most important book, and when I talk about some of these thinkers, Voltaire, Rousseau, Locke, Hobbes, Hume, Adam Smith, the most important single one is Edmund Burke, and what he wrote in the Reflections on the French Revolution, and how he correctly analyzed. People who don't know the book but know a little bit about the history, they don't realize that he wrote the book as the first stage of the French Revolution was concluding, and he predicted the Reign of Terror, which had not yet begun, which happened the following years after he wrote it, with Robespierre and the Jacobins and the guillotines. And the French Revolution has always been predicated on statist centralized power and a socialism. The state is first, not the individual rights of man. So I always say the entire slogan of France, Liberté, Égalité, Fraternité, is absolutely flawed, because you can't have liberty, freedom, if the focus is on equality. And fraternity, a forced brotherhood within the society to try and promote this égalité, the equality, is a coercive mechanism. So I believe that their entire social and political scientific structure, liberté, égalité, represented in liberté, égalité, fraternity, is fraudulent and not possible. It is much more important to uphold the rights of the individual, as the Bill of Rights does, as the constitutional framework based on Enlightenment individual values is upheld by Locke, by Hobbes, by Burke.
The individual rights, or rights of the individual,
Rights of man as given to man by God.
Right.
Natural rights.
Basically the
Free
foundation
speech.
of the United States. Right now, we see the sectarian clashes, sectarian movements, and this Black Lives Matter, which is not inclusive, because white life doesn't matter for those people.
Well,
So
for them, all you say is all lives matter, and you get hit in the head with a brick.
right.
So.
But,
And black lives don't matter if a black life is making an individual choice to vote for Trump. Then that black life doesn't matter.
right. How
These
do
people-
you see this?
These people are evil cultural Marxists. They're children on steroids who have been fed this, and this is why the breakdown of the Democratic Party and the new hybrid of a populist, economically nationalist Republican right is been not created or catalyzed by great Republican innovation. It's been the Republicans filled the gap under Trump and Bannon with where the left had left. So the left had left this sort of centrist Workers' Party mentality and moved to the radical ivory tower, 1960s countercultural left, where no objective truth need apply. These are people who actually fight for transgender rights. How many transgender are there in America of 330 million? 1,000? 5,000? 10,000? We should reorder the entire American society around not even a minority, an infinitesimal activist group of people who most rational people do believe have a mental illness. If you mutilate your body, let's say you cut yourself like the high school girls do with knives or razors because they're going through some teenage angst, you send them to a shrink because they're mentally not well. But if you cut off your shoe shack, then you have to block that one out.
Right.
If you cut off and mutilate your body, you're engaged in some sort of higher level of beauty of recognizing that you're in the wrong body. Well, no, there are two genders, men and women, and thank God for it, because if that weren't the case, there'd be no procreation. The human race wouldn't have ever existed. It would have been over an evolved moment in time and moved on to something else.
But this is done on purpose. What the purpose?
Of course, the purpose is to throw truth on its head and make everybody an activist that will subjugate themselves to the mob. If the mob will tell you that, what's up is down, this is 1984. This is, and then I learned to love Big Brother. The truth didn't matter. What occurred in the scenes in 1984 when, the alliances between Oceania and Eurasia, and they shifted and a new war front was open. They would go through history and they would change every single document to reflect the new reality. And that's power. And the left is in pursuit of that power. So if you can do that, this is what they're doing, toppling statues. Let us break down every symbol and signal of what was, of our history, and then we can rewrite it as we see fit. These people aren't just going after, Confederate war generals. They toppled statues of Abraham Lincoln, who emancipated the slaves. Frederick Douglass, arguably the greatest abolitionist. They are nihilists, drunk on activism and violence, perpetuated by the radical institutional left of the Democratic Party, who cannot condemn them.
Right. But normally, if you, Matthew Tyrmand, went to somebody else's house and tried to burn it, you would be arrested and spend better part of your life in prison.
Yeah.
They are immune in the United States. Why is so?
Because the left controls these places where this is going on. This shit ain't happening in Texas. This is not happening in places where there's strong Republican rule of law, where rule of law is maintained because you have Republican governance. This is happening in the leftiest of the lefty places. Seattle, Portland, Oregon, Minneapolis, and Minnesota. And Minnesota's a big state where there's a lefty anchor in the Twin Cities, but the rest of the state has some conservative predilections. This is why Trump's going to win a landslide.
Okay.
6 Democratic governors in Minnesota endorsed Trump. These are from the northern part of the state where there's working class people who are iron ore miners, beet farmers, wheat farmers.
Are people scared with this?
They're frightened. They're crazy. As much as white suburban housewives, the women who hate Trump because of his history of philandering and his style and his aggressiveness with everyone. They say he's misogynist because he's aggressive with women. I mean, he elevated and escalated more women to higher roles in the 80s and 90s within his business. He is the ultimate feminist because he's a meritocrat, because he believes in meritocracy. He doesn't believe in identity politics. And he says, show me the best man or woman for the job. Look at all the women in his administration. The left could never extol Kellyanne Conway, the the campaign manager, the first female campaign manager of a winning ticket. If she was a leftist, she was a Democrat, she'd be on every magazine cover for the end of her days, breaking the glass ceiling on presidential political campaigns. Instead, they unwoman her. She's not a woman because she doesn't agree with their views.
Yeah.
And most Americans see the ludicrousness of this and the dishonesty, the coercion and the ugliness of this sort of pursuit of power, of breaking down truth.
So there is a silent majority, and this majority will speak on November 3rd.
Agreed.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I also want to say one thing. Big fan of your new foreign minister. I think he's a really smart guy. This guy translated John Locke into Polish, had it done in the 90s. That's a really cool thinker. That's somebody who I really am happy to see. Dobra zmiana, finally get some good dobra zmiana.
So we will see.
Because his predecessors were absolute losers.
A lot of good words, and funny story is that this person like sneaked out from the background of peace. Like he wasn't in the front.
No, he's been doing a good job doing what he's, as a legal and political science scholar, as a lecturer in University of Texas and in the U.S. He's a brilliant, brilliant, erudite guy. I've enjoyed watching him for years with what he writes and says. So I'm very, very optimistic about the foreign ministry for the first time in many, many, many years.
Right. Do you think the communists in Poland are scared?
The what side?
Like you know, we've been for 50 years a country occupied, not only but Russian troops and tanks and so on, but also by elites created by Soviets. And they are pretty much doing quite well.
Yeah, well,
there's 30 years passed, and they are still in the tops of the
look,
old houses.
We've had this discussion about Bolek Lech Wałęsa, about how he was a Soviet commie construct to deliver amnesty for the elite, and that's what he did. And when Mosbacher and Mazurek get in a fight on Twitter about TFON, I thought it was shameful that Mosbacher not only attacked a party member when there's an election, and that's an interference of sorts, but then said, when Mazurek said TFON is a haven of ex-spooks and internal security and commie elite. Everybody knows it. It's well documented. And Mosbacher not only disagreed with it, she said, "You know you're lying knowingly about this." Well, that's either proving Mosbacher is a very stupid woman, which there's a potential for that argument, or that she's on the payroll or lobbying for TFON Discovery. TFON was owned by Scripps. Scripps was bought by Discovery. Discovery CEO David Zaslav's a good friend of hers in the New York salons of the elite. Georgette Mosbacher was the finance chair for Mitt Romney. That was her kind of Republican, a board member for the Atlantic Council, transatlantic, federalizing of power. So not a sovereigntist. So when she says she's a Republican, she's one of those Republicans that we talked about that are not of the new good populist, economically nationalist Republican. She doesn't get more elite than a career socialite who married a wealthy husband after wealthy husband, who built her business. How did she end up here? Finance circles in the Republican Party, and Trump didn't have that many people, and I guess she played the game well. But when she says that about Mazurek, who I have no affinity for Mazurek. I find Mazurek to be a odious, very stupid woman, obnoxious, loud, crass, not anything of value to say. But Mazurek was 100% right. So for me, it was kind of tough watching this. What side do I get involved in? Because they both annoy the hell out of me. But I agreed with Mazurek because Mazurek was right on merit. There's truth to this. So for Mosbacher to say what she said was really, really, really silly and incorrect, and she'll be gone soon, thankfully. So that is what it is.
The final question to you, Matthew, because you've chosen to be Polish, and that's unpopular choice.
If I need more friends, I'll get a dog, and as you know, I already have a dog. So, Poland is the land of my father. As I achieved and matured in my late adolescence and then into high school and college, I became very cognizant of the history, his history, this national history, the state, and the people, the państwo, and fascinated by it. And then when I started coming here in 2010, the love affair was built on merit and connection, and I'm very happy that I can engage here as I can. And of course, I'm independent. I have to remind this to the politicians of all sides. I'm independent, so I'm going to say what I'm going to say. If Ziobro doesn't like it, how I call out his bad behavior and his evil actions, then he can, shove it up his you-know-what. And then Mosbacher, same thing. At this point, my personal life is very happy and content. I engage in the professional activities I want to. I engage in politics on my terms. I don't work for anybody. And I'm going to say the truth as I see fit. Maybe this is my father's greatest legacy because this is what he wanted to do and couldn't. He couldn't under communism. He could document what he could in the diary, not thinking anyone would ever read it or see it. And it was, sat there for 26 years till it was published in 1980, and it had some impact. But he was stifled and oppressed and censored. Even in the US, the left did the same thing to him. And now in post the 1990s and 2000s, when you've got distribution democratized through social media, internet, much cheaper to film like we're doing here at the scale we want to do in alternative medias, not just state-owned media here in Europe and not just private mainstream media like CNN in the US. We've got mechanisms that can get our truths out to more people and put forward ideas, and I'm thrilled that I can take part in doing so, whether they're popular or not. At least I hope people realize with me what I say is what I believe, and you get what, I wear my heart on my sleeve about these things.
All right.
So,
thank you very much.
thank you, my pleasure.
That was it for tonight.